The sun bled across the Montana horizon, painting the valley in shades of blood and gold. From the stagecoach window, Sarah Blackwood saw the ridgeline that marked the end of her world. At 22, she was supposed to be planning a life, not paying for one that had been gambled away. Her fingers, cold and trembling, gripped the worn fabric of her dress. This was it. The final stop. "This is as far as I take you, miss," the driver grunted, his voice rough as the trail they'd just traveled. He hauled her single, small trunk from the roof and dropped it in the dust. "The Blackfeet settlement is just over that ridge. Someone's waitin'." Sarah nodded, a lump of fear lodged in her throat. She couldn't speak. 3 months ago, her father, a man whose charm was as deep as his debts, played one last hand of poker. He wagered against a wealthy trader named Thornton, a man who did business with the tribes. The final bet wasn't for money, it was for her. Her hand in marriage to a warrior she'd never met. A man called Swift Arrow. A voice cut through the silence. "There she is." A bearded white man on a powerful horse trotted toward her, leading a second, smaller horse behind him. "Name's Holloway. I work for Mr. Thornton. He sent me to fetch you." Sarah found her voice, though it cracked. "There has to be a mistake. My father had no right to do this." Holloway's face was stone. "Your father signed the papers, miss. Legal and binding. Mr. Thornton's arranged everything with the chief. The young warrior needs a wife. You're it." He seemed to see the terror in her eyes, and his expression softened, just a fraction. "Look, I know this ain't ideal, but you got nowhere else to go now, do you?" He was right. And that was the cruelest part. After the game, her father had vanished, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of his addiction. No money, no family willing to take her in. It was this, or the streets. She had chosen this. She had chosen survival. The ride to the settlement was a blur of silent dread. As they crested the ridge, the camp came into view. It was a strange mix of old and new, traditional hide teepees standing beside rough-hewn wooden cabins. People moved with purpose, their faces turning to watch the white woman ride into their home. They didn't look welcoming. They looked wary. They stopped before the largest cabin. 3 men stood waiting. One was an old chief, his face a roadmap of wisdom and hardship. Another was a white man in a fine suit, his smile not reaching his cold, calculating eyes. That had to be Thornton. The third man stood tall and proud, his posture rigid, his dark eyes burning with a cold fire that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. This was him. Swift Arrow. "Welcome, Miss Blackwood," Thornton said, his voice slick as oil. "A long journey, I imagine." Sarah ignored him, her eyes fixed on the warrior, but she spoke to Thornton. "Where is my father?" "Haven't seen him since our game in St. Louis," Thornton replied, dripping with false sympathy. "But I assure you, our arrangement is beneficial for everyone. You'll be well cared for." He gestured toward the warrior. "As Swift Arrow's wife." Swift Arrow's gaze finally met hers, and the contempt in it was a physical blow. "I did not ask for a white woman," he said, his English perfect and sharp. "This is your scheme, Thornton, not mine." "Now, son," Thornton began, but the warrior cut him off with a vicious slice of his hand. "I am not your son. You raised me after my parents died, but you do not command me." He turned to the chief. "Grandfather, this is a dishonor to our ways." The chief, Many Horses, raised a weathered hand. "The council has decided, Swift Arrow. Our alliance with Thornton brings supplies our people need. This marriage strengthens that bond." His words were final. The decision was made. Sarah stood there, feeling like a ghost. Humiliation burned through her. To be traded like a horse was one thing. To be so completely and utterly rejected by the man she was forced to marry was another. It was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. "The ceremony is tomorrow," Thornton announced, his voice booming with satisfaction. "Miss Blackwood will stay with Morning Dove tonight." A kind-faced, middle-aged woman stepped forward and gently took Sarah's arm. "Come, daughter," she said softly. "You must be tired." As Morning Dove led her away, Sarah heard Swift Arrow's final, chilling words to Thornton. You may force this marriage, but you cannot force me to accept her. Inside Mourning Dove's teepee, the shadows danced like spirits on the hide walls. Sarah fought a losing battle against tears as the older woman helped her unpack her meager belongings. He is angry now, Mourning Dove said, her voice a gentle balm. But Swift Arrow is a good man. His heart is wounded by many betrayals. He hates me, Sarah whispered, the words catching in her throat. I don't want to marry someone who hates the sight of me. Mourning Dove patted her hand, her touch surprisingly firm. Sometimes the path we walk is not the one we choose, but every path has a purpose. She paused, her eyes dark with memory. Swift Arrow's parents were killed by white settlers. He was just a child. Thornton found him, raised him between two worlds. Now he trusts neither. Sleep offered no escape. Sarah lay awake all night, imagining a future in this strange place, chained to a man who despised her. The morning came far too soon, bringing with it a group of women who prepared her for the ceremony. They dressed her in a buckskin dress, intricately decorated with beads that shimmered in the morning light. This was my daughter's, Mourning Dove explained, her voice thick with emotion. She walks with the ancestors now. Wearing the dress felt like carrying the weight of a ghost. The ceremony was a cold, brief affair. Swift Arrow stood beside her, a statue carved from rage and resentment. He spoke the required words, his voice flat and empty. Sarah felt hollow, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, played by men who saw her as nothing more than property. Afterward, Thornton threw a celebration, crowing like a rooster who'd just won a fight. He pulled Sarah aside, his grip on her arm tight. You've done well, my dear. This union secures my trading rights for years. I am not your dear, Sarah shot back, pulling her arm away. I didn't do this for you. Thornton laughed, a harsh grating sound. Spirited. Good. You'll need that fire to win over your husband. Why me? Sarah demanded. Why did you choose me for this? His smile vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. Your father was desperate, and Swift Arrow. He needs a little civilizing. He straddles two worlds but belongs in neither. You, my dear, are my insurance. You will keep him useful to me. The meaning was clear. She wasn't just a wife. She was a warden. As night fell, they led her to Swift Arrow's cabin. It was on the edge of the settlement, a place that, like its owner, was caught between two cultures. The inside was sparse, a mix of native crafts and Western furniture. He entered after her, shutting the door with a thud that echoed the closing of a cell. There is food, he said, not looking at her. He pointed to a pallet of furs on the far side of the room, as far from his own bed as possible. You will sleep there. We are married now, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Shouldn't we at least try to? We are married by paper and ceremony only, he interrupted, his voice like ice. Nothing more. I did not choose this. You did not choose this. We are both his pawns. Sarah's fear suddenly gave way to a spark of defiance. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze. I may not have chosen to be here, but I will choose how I live. I will not spend my life being hated for something I couldn't control. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Then the mask of indifference slammed back down. Get some rest. Tomorrow you will learn to earn your keep. As Sarah lay on the cold, lonely pallet, a silent vow took root in her heart. She would not be a pawn. She would not be broken. She would build a life here, with or without him. And one day, she would find out why Thornton was so desperate to control the man who now slept on the other side of the room. A stranger who was now, impossibly, her husband. The game was not over. It had just begun. Dawn sliced through the cabin's single window, cold and sharp. Sarah woke on her pallet, the furs doing little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The cabin was empty. Swift Arrow was already gone. She dressed in her simplest cotton dress, the buckskin from the ceremony feeling like a costume for a play she no longer wished to be in. She was determined to face the day, whatever it brought. The settlement was a hive of activity. Women tended fires, their laughter mixing with the smoke. Children chased each other between the lodges, their shouts echoing in the crisp air. Men gathered in small groups, preparing for the day's hunt. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, a ship without a rudder, completely and utterly lost. "You look lost, daughter." Morning Dove's voice was a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of unfamiliarity. She appeared at Sarah's side, a warm smile on her face. "Come, I will show you what needs doing." The day passed in a blur of new tasks. Morning Dove patiently taught Sarah the rhythm of life in the settlement. How to tend a cooking fire so it gave steady heat, not just smoke. Where to draw the cleanest water from the creek. Which plants were medicine and which were poison. It was a world of knowledge Sarah had never imagined, a language spoken not with words, but with the earth itself. As they worked, Morning Dove spoke of Swift Arrow. "He is a great warrior," she said, scraping a hide with practiced ease, "and a respected hunter. He also translates for the council when traders come. His place here is important, but complicated." "Because of Thornton," Sarah stated, not a question. Morning Dove nodded grimly. "Thornton gave him a white man's education, but in doing so, he tried to cut him from his roots. He uses Swift Arrow's skills for his own profit." "And now he's using our marriage the same way," Sarah finished, the bitterness sharp on her tongue. It was all a transaction. Everyone was being used. Late that afternoon, Sarah returned to the cabin. She was determined to make it a home, even if it was a cold one. Using the skills Morning Dove had taught her, she prepared a simple stew from the supplies stored inside. It was an act of defiance, a statement that she would not simply wither away. She would contribute. She would exist. Swift Arrow returned as the sun dipped below the peaks. The aroma of the stew filled the small space. Surprise flickered across his face, there and gone in an instant. He sat at the small wooden table without a word and began to eat. The silence was deafening. "Is it acceptable?" Sarah finally asked, unable to bear the quiet any longer. "It will do," he replied, his voice flat. But she noticed he cleaned the bowl. She tried again, desperate for a connection. Any connection. "I met some of the women today. Morning Dove was kind. She's been teaching me." For the first time since she'd arrived, Swift Arrow looked at her. Really looked at her. "Why are you trying so hard? You do not want this life." Sarah met his intense gaze, her own resolve hardening. "Neither do you. But we are here, and I will not spend my days drowning in misery. I may not have chosen this place, but I can choose to make a life here." His lip curled into a slight sneer. "A temporary life? Do you think Thornton will let this last forever? He will tire of this game, and then he will discard us both." The words stung, but she pushed back. "Is that what you want? To simply wait for him to decide our fates? Again?" His expression darkened. "What I want has never mattered to him." "It matters to me," Sarah said, the words softer than she intended. "What do you want, Swift Arrow?" The question hung in the air between them, shocking him into stillness. He stared at her, his mind clearly racing, the walls he had built around himself trembling for just a moment. Then, just as quickly, they were back up. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floorboards. "I'm going to the council meeting. Do not wait up." He left her alone in the silence, but something had changed. She had seen behind the mask. She had asked a question he clearly had not been asked in a very long time. The days settled into a strange rhythm. Autumn painted the valley in brilliant strokes of orange and red. Sarah threw herself into learning the ways of the Blackfeet, finding a surprising sense of purpose in the work. The women of the tribe, initially suspicious, began to accept her, won over by her tireless effort and quiet respect. Swift Arrow remained a distant, brooding presence in her life, their conversations clipped and necessary. But the open hostility was gone, replaced by a cautious, watchful civility. One evening, a month after her arrival, she returned to the cabin to find him dressed in his finest buckskins, adorned with intricate quill work. He was preparing to leave. "There is a tribal gathering tonight," he stated, not offering any more information. "I will be late. An impulse, bold and reckless, seized her. "May I come?" He stopped, turning to face her. A frown creased his brow. "It is not for outsiders." The words stung, but she held her ground. "I am your wife," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "How can I ever be anything but an outsider if I am never allowed inside?" Her words seemed to hit a target she hadn't known she was aiming for. He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Then, with a curt nod, he relented. "Change into the buckskin dress. Stay close to me, and do not speak unless spoken to." A thrill of nervous excitement shot through her. It was a test, she knew it, and she was determined not to fail. The gathering was held in a large, open space around a roaring bonfire. The rhythmic beat of drums vibrated through the ground, a primal heartbeat that seemed to sync with her own. Dancers moved in the flickering firelight, their movements telling stories Sarah couldn't understand but felt in her soul. She sat beside Swift Arrow, a silent observer, acutely aware of the curious glances cast her way. "The dancers tell the story of our creation." Swift Arrow's voice was a low murmur beside her ear, a startling intimacy in the public space. "How Old Man created the animals and the Blackfeet from the mud of the river." He kept talking. For the rest of the evening, he became her translator, not just of words, but of culture. He explained the meaning of the songs, the significance of the ceremonial paint, the history behind the dances. It was the most he had ever spoken to her. She drank in every word. A starving woman finally offered a meal. As they walked back to their cabin under a blanket of brilliant stars, the silence between them was different. It was no longer empty, but full of unspoken thoughts. "Thank you," she said, gathering her courage, "for letting me come, and for explaining everything." He walked several paces before answering. "You showed respect. That is, unexpected." "Why?" she asked, challenging him gently. "Because I'm white?" "Because you are here against your will," he corrected, his voice low. "I expected anger, tears, demands to be sent back to your world." They reached the cabin, and the moonlight illuminated his face. She could see the deep lines of sorrow etched around his eyes. "I have no world to return to," she confessed, the truth a raw ache in her chest. "My father gambled it all away. He left me to this fate." A flicker of understanding, of empathy, softened his hard expression. "We have that in common, then," he said quietly, "being abandoned by those who should have protected us." The chasm between them had always seemed impossibly wide, but in that moment, she felt the first, fragile strand of a bridge being spun across the divide. The next morning, Sarah woke to find something new beside her pallet. It was a small book, bound in worn leather. Inside, written in neat English script, were Blackfeet stories and legends. She looked at Swift Arrow, a question in her eyes. He simply nodded toward the book. "If you wish to understand," he said, his voice even, "you should start there." He was letting her in, just a crack, but it was enough to give her hope. That hope was a fragile flame, and she knew a single gust of wind could extinguish it. That wind had a name: Thornton. He arrived a week later, unannounced, swaggering into their cabin while Swift Arrow was out on a hunt. He looked around the small space, a smug, proprietary smile on his face. "Well, well," he said, his eyes raking over Sarah. "Playing the dutiful little Indian wife, I see. How utterly charming." Sarah stood, her heart pounding, putting the small table between them. "What do you want, Mr. Thornton?" "Just checking on my investment," he purred, his smile turning cold. "Tell me, has my wild boy been properly tamed yet?" "Swift Arrow is a man of honor," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. "He is not a boy to be tamed." Thornton's smile vanished. "Don't you get ideas above your station, girl. You are here for one reason: to keep him loyal to me, to keep him useful." "And if I fail?" she challenged, finding a sliver of courage. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Then you are of no use to me at all, are you? Remember where you are. Remember that without me, you have nothing. And no one. The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but crystal clear. She was disposable. When Swift Arrow returned that evening, he knew instantly that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face. She told him everything, every word of Thornton's visit, every veiled threat. With each sentence, the muscles in his jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "He threatens you to control me," he said, his voice a low growl of contained fury. "He always finds new chains." "What hold does he really have on you?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but insistent. "You're not a child anymore. Why do you let him?" He began to pace the small cabin like a caged wolf. "Legal guardianship until recently. Trade agreements the tribe now depends on for survival. And knowledge of things from my past." "What things?" she pressed. He stopped, the conflict warring in his eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and seemed to make a decision. "When I was 16, some white trappers were caught on tribal land. There was a fight. A man was shot. He died." He paused, the memory clouding his face. "Thornton claimed he protected me, that he made the whole thing go away. He said the law would have seen me hang. I never knew if it was the truth or just another one of his manipulations." Sarah moved toward him, her heart aching for the boy he must have been. "He uses fear to control you, just like he uses my desperation to control me. We are both his prisoners." She stopped just before him, looking up into his tortured eyes. "We have to find a way to break free." For the first time since she had met him, Swift Arrow looked at her not as a burden, but as an ally. A flicker of something that might have been hope sparked in the depths of his eyes. "Perhaps," he said, the single word full of weight. "But challenging Thornton is a dangerous game. For now, we must pretend to be the pawns he thinks we are." That night, when he laid out his bedding, he placed it slightly closer to hers. He didn't cross the space between them, not yet. But he had narrowed the distance. It was a silent admission, a gesture that spoke louder than words. They were no longer just two people trapped in a cabin. They were two prisoners, plotting an escape. And for the first time, Sarah didn't feel so alone. But as she drifted off to sleep, a new, terrifying thought took hold. Swift Arrow had admitted to being there when a man was killed. Thornton knew about it. And a man like Thornton would not hesitate to use that secret to destroy them both. He wasn't just holding chains, he was holding a hangman's noose. Winter came to the valley like a thief in the night, stealing the last of the autumn color and leaving a world of stark white and silver in its place. The first snow fell thick and fast, and when Sarah stepped out of the cabin at dawn, the world was hushed, transformed. The cold was a physical thing, a sharp intake of breath, but it was beautiful. Life in the settlement turned inward. The crackle of fires and the murmur of stories replaced the bustling outdoor work of the warmer months. Sarah, to her own surprise, found a place in this new rhythm. Swift Arrow had begun to include her, not with any great fanfare, but with small, significant gestures. He no longer questioned her presence when she joined the women tanning hides. He would sometimes ask her to walk with him to visit an elder's lodge. He had even begun to teach her the Blackfeet language in the evenings, their heads bent close together over the flickering firelight. "Your pronunciation is improving," he said one night, the compliment so rare it felt like a precious gift. Sarah smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "I want to understand your people better." "Our people," he corrected her, his voice soft. He looked surprised at his own words, as if they'd escaped without his permission. The moment hung between them, fragile and full of unspoken meaning. Sarah quickly turned her attention to the moccasin she was mending. Her cheeks flushed. "There is a winter ceremony tomorrow," Swift Arrow said, breaking the spell. "The women prepare gifts. Will you come?" It wasn't a command, or a grudging acceptance. It was an invitation. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her heart giving a hopeful leap. The winter ceremony was the most elaborate gathering she had yet seen. The entire tribe packed into the great council lodge, the air thick with the smell of sweetgrass and roasting meat. Elders told the sacred stories of their people, their voices weaving a tapestry of history and myth. Sarah sat beside Swift Arrow, so close their shoulders brushed. When the ceremonial foods were passed around, he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, and explained the meaning of each dish. At one point, during a solemn prayer, his hand brushed hers. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. It was a simple touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. Later, as families exchanged gifts, Swift Arrow turned to her. He held out a pair of moccasins, beautifully decorated with dyed porcupine quills in a floral pattern. "Winter is harsh," he said, a touch of awkwardness in his voice. "Your boots are not made for the deep snow." "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers tracing the intricate design. They were the most beautiful things she had ever owned. She looked up and caught Mourning Dove's eye across the lodge. The older woman was smiling, a knowing, happy smile that made Sarah blush to the roots of her hair. Walking back to the cabin through the moon-drenched snow, a comfortable silence settled between them. Sarah realized with a startling clarity that everything had changed. The prison she had been sent to had, impossibly, started to feel like a home. The man she had been forced to marry was slowly becoming the man she would have chosen. That night, they talked for hours. He spoke of his childhood before Thornton, of his real parents, of the stories his mother used to tell him. Sarah, in turn, shared memories of her own mother, who had died when she was a girl, leaving her alone with a father who loved cards more than he loved his own daughter. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, they found common ground in their shared histories of loss and loneliness. In the weeks that followed, the space between their palettes disappeared entirely. He taught her how to read the tracks of animals in the snow, how to set a snare that was both effective and humane. She, in turn, taught him the songs her mother used to sing, her voice filling the small cabin with melodies from a world away. Their lives began to intertwine, weaving a new pattern, one made of two different threads coming together to create something strong and new. "You are not what I expected," he admitted one night, as they sipped hot mint tea by the fire. "Neither are you," she replied honestly. "I was taught that your people were savages. I was taught to be afraid." His face grew serious. "And I was taught that white women were fragile, useless in this world." "We were both told lies," she said softly, looking into his dark, intense eyes. "Lies meant to keep us apart. And yet," he said, his voice a low whisper, "here we are." The first time he kissed her, it was on a hunting trip. He was showing her how to reset a rabbit snare when she slipped on a hidden patch of ice, tumbling against him. His arms came around her to steady her, strong and sure. For a heart-stopping moment, they just stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the cold air swirling around them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. His face was just inches from hers. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, asking a question without words. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and his lips met hers. It was a gentle, questioning kiss, tentative and tender, and it was over almost as soon as it began. He pulled back, a look of uncertainty on his face. "I should not have. But I wanted you to," she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. They walked back to the cabin holding hands. The world felt new, vibrant, full of possibility. That night, he moved his bedding next to hers. They didn't do anything more than hold each other, but it was a profound shift. It was a choice. They were no longer just surviving an arrangement. They were building a marriage. As winter's hold on the valley deepened, so did their bond. He would bring her small, simple gifts, a uniquely shaped stone from the creek, a striking hawk feather for her hair. She began embroidering Blackfeet patterns onto his hunting shirts, her needle moving with a skill that surprised even herself. The cabin, once a symbol of her captivity, had become their sanctuary, but their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. While Mourning Dove and many others smiled upon them, Some of the more traditional members of the tribe watched with suspicion. They saw Sarah not as a wife, but as an infection, a white influence that could poison their way of life. "Not everyone is happy for us," Sarah said one evening, after two women had pointedly turned their backs on her at the creek. Swift Arrow's expression was grim. "Some fear you will draw me away from our ways. Others fear your presence will only bring more white people to our lands." "And what do you fear?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, he took her hand, his grip tight. "I fear what Thornton will do when he learns that we are no longer playing his game." The name was a splash of icy water, a harsh reminder of the man who still held the strings. They knew he was away on business, but the spring thaw was only weeks away, and with it, his return was inevitable. "What will we do?" Sarah asked, the old fear creeping back in. "We will face him together," Swift Arrow said, his jaw set. "But we must be ready. Thornton does not give up control easily." He was more right than he knew. A few days later, a rider came from the trading post with a message. Thornton was returning. And he wasn't coming alone. He was bringing a government official with him to discuss a new treaty. The news sent a shockwave of tension through the settlement. Chief Manyhorses called an immediate council meeting. As the tribe's best translator, Swift Arrow would be at the center of the storm. "He will try to use us," Swift Arrow warned her that night, his voice low and urgent. "He will try to turn our marriage, which he created, into a weapon against me, against my people. Whatever he says, whatever he does, you must remember that what we have now is real. It is what we built, not what he arranged." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the worried line of his jaw. "I won't let him come between us." He took both of her hands in his expression grave. "There is something else. Something you must know before he returns." He took a deep breath. "The papers my father signed, that contract, it holds no real power here, on tribal land. The ceremony we had made us married, in the eyes of my people. But in the white man's world." He hesitated, struggling with the words. A cold dread washed over her. "You mean, I'm not legally his wife? Under American law?" He nodded, the pain in his eyes evident. "Thornton created those papers to trap you. I doubt he ever filed them with any territorial authority. He just needed you to believe you had no choice." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. All this time, all these months. "So, I could have just left?" "Yes," he whispered, the word laced with anguish. "And now that you know, you are free to make that choice. Do you wish to stay?" She looked at him, at this man who had gone from a fearsome stranger to the center of her world. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that she would leave him. Her answer was not in words. She leaned in and kissed him, a deep, passionate kiss that left no room for doubt. "My place is here," she said against his lips, "with you, by choice, not by force." They held each other through the night, a new sense of purpose solidifying between them. The chains Thornton had used were illusions, built of lies and fear. Now, armed with the truth, and with a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places, they would be ready. 2 days later, a scout reported that Thornton's party was entering the valley. As they prepared for the confrontation, Swift Arrow placed a small leather pouch on a cord around her neck. "This is a medicine bundle," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "It holds sacred items for protection. It was my mother's. Now it is yours." Sarah bowed her head, clutching the small pouch. It felt warm against her skin. "Whatever happens today," Swift Arrow said, taking her face in his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks, "know this. You brought light into my life when I thought there was only darkness." They walked out of their cabin and toward the center of the settlement, hand in hand. They were ready to face the man who had forced them together, the man who had tried to break them, the man who had no idea that in trying to create two prisoners, he had instead forged an unbreakable weapon aimed directly at his own heart. The game was about to change. Thornton rode into the settlement, not as a traitor, but as a conqueror. He was flanked by a grim-faced man in a dusty suit, whom he introduced as Commissioner Richardson from Washington, and 4 hired guns whose eyes roamed the camp with undisguised contempt. They were received in the great council lodge. Chief Many Horses, the tribal elders, and Swift Arrow sat on one side. Sarah sat just behind her husband, a silent presence, her new moccasins peeking out from under the hem of her dress. She wore her hair in a single braid, the way the Blackfeet women did. Thornton's gaze fell on her, and his eyes narrowed. He was clearly surprised and displeased to see her looking so at ease, so integrated. He quickly masked his annoyance with a broad, false smile. Commissioner Richardson has traveled a great distance to discuss new arrangements, he announced, his voice echoing in the lodge. Progressive measures that will ensure peace and prosperity for all. Swift Arrow translated, his voice steady and calm, but he stripped Thornton's words of their flowery poison, relaying only the stark facts. Thornton shot him a venomous look. Richardson then spoke for nearly an hour, his voice a droning monotone, about the government's generous offer. A small protected reservation in exchange for the tribe giving up their vast, traditional hunting grounds. It was a death sentence wrapped in diplomatic ribbons. During a break in the tense negotiations, Thornton cornered Sarah as she drew water from a barrel. "Still playing the little Indian princess, are we?" he sneered, his voice low and menacing. "I'm surprised. I truly expected you'd be begging me to take you home by now." "This is my home," Sarah said, her voice even, refusing to show the fear that fluttered in her stomach. "And my husband and I are very happy." His face darkened into a thunderous scowl. "Don't be a fool, girl. This little fantasy is over. These negotiations will change everything. By summer, this tribe will be on a reservation, and you'll be exactly what I tell you to be." "You're selling them out," she realized, the full scope of his betrayal hitting her. "All your promises of fair trade." He shrugged, a dismissive, arrogant gesture. "I'm a businessman. The future doesn't belong to savages clinging to the past. Swift Arrow would understand that if he weren't so damn stubborn." He leaned closer, his breath hot and foul. "You don't know him. I made him, and I can unmake him." He paused for effect. "Did he ever tell you about the settler he murdered 6 years ago? One word from me to Richardson, and your precious husband will be rotting in a federal prison by winter." Her blood ran cold. It was the threat she had feared, but she held his gaze. "Is that all you have, Mr. Thornton? Threats?" "Oh no," he replied, his slick smile returning. "I have opportunities. Help me. Convince Swift Arrow to support this treaty. Get him to sell out his people. Do that, and I'll make sure the 2 of you are well taken care of. A nice house, special trading rights, a comfortable life. And if we refuse?" The smile vanished. "Then I will see him hang, and you'll be left out here, truly alone. Think about your choice, my dear. Your future depends on it." She returned to the lodge, her heart a block of ice in her chest. That night, in the privacy of their cabin, the dam of her composure broke. She told Swift Arrow everything. "The treaty is a lie," he said, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "It would confine our people to the barren foothills. We would starve." He stopped and looked at her. "He threatened you with the settler's death?" "He said he'd tell the commissioner you're a murderer," she whispered. A grim acceptance settled over his features. "I expected as much." He came to her, taking her trembling hands in his. "What Thornton doesn't know is that the truth is far more complicated. The man's death was an accident. He attacked my younger cousin during a trapping dispute. I was defending him. It was self-defense." "Can you prove it?" Hope flared in her chest. He shook his head, the hope dying as quickly as it came. "There were witnesses, all Blackfeet. In a white man's court, our words are worth less than the dust on their boots." They sat in silence, trapped. Thornton had them perfectly cornered. Then an idea sparked in Sarah's mind, a desperate, dangerous gamble. "What if we could destroy his credibility," she said slowly, "before he has a chance to destroy you?" That night, Sarah committed to an act that could have seen her killed. While the camp slept, She slipped out of her cabin and crept toward the guest lodge where Thornton and Richardson were staying. She could hear Thornton's heavy snores from outside. Heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst from her chest, she found his saddlebags. Her hands shook violently as she pulled out a heavy leather portfolio. She didn't dare open it there. She clutched it to her chest and ran, silent as a shadow, back to her own cabin. By the first light of dawn, they had found it. It was worse than they could have imagined. Thornton hadn't just been manipulating the tribe. He'd been playing both sides. He had letters, contracts, and maps. He'd been deliberately mistranslating the tribe's positions to Richardson, making them seem more aggressive than they were. At the same time, he'd been misrepresenting the government's offer to the tribe, making it seem far harsher. He was creating a conflict he could then step in and solve for a price. And then they found the most damning proof of all. Letters confirming that Thornton had already sold the mining and hunting rights to the very lands he was supposed to be helping the Blackfeet keep, to a railroad company. He was betraying everyone for his own profit. "He's been playing everyone from the start," Swift Arrow said, his voice raw with fury. But as he shuffled through the last of the papers, he froze. He pulled out a single folded document. It was old, the ink faded. It was a deed. A deed for the parcel of land where his parents' cabin had stood. The land where they had been killed by settlers. The deed was dated the day after their murder, and it was signed over to one man, a young, ambitious trader named Thornton. The breath left Sarah's body. "It wasn't random settlers," she whispered in horror. Swift Arrow looked up at her, his face a mask of terrible dawning realization. The betrayal was deeper, darker, and more personal than either of them could have ever dreamed. Thornton hadn't just found him as a boy, he had made him an orphan. The final day of negotiations began under a sky the color of slate. When the council was assembled, Swift Arrow stood. He respectfully requested permission to translate directly for Chief Many Horses, stating that to ensure clarity, a second translator was needed. Thornton objected immediately, his face flushing with anger. But Richardson, whose own suspicions had been growing, nodded his assent. "Let's proceed." For the first time, the Blackfeet leaders heard the government's true offer. It was still a poor deal, but it was not the death sentence Thornton had described. And Richardson, in turn, learned that many of the concessions he believed the tribe had already made had never even been mentioned to them. The room filled with confusion and angry murmurs. At the height of the chaos, Sarah stood. All eyes turned to her. She addressed Commissioner Richardson, her voice clear and strong. "Sir, I believe there has been a deliberate and criminal misrepresentation in these talks. Mr. Thornton has been altering the translations to serve his own financial interests." "This is outrageous!" Thornton roared, surging to his feet. "This woman has no standing here. She's a gambler's daughter I took in out of pity." "I speak as an American citizen," Sarah countered, her voice ringing with conviction, "and as the wife of a respected Blackfeet warrior, and I have evidence of Mr. Thornton's crimes." One by one, they laid out the truth. They presented the letters, the contracts, the proof that Thornton had already sold the land he was pretending to negotiate for. His schemes unraveled before the entire council. He was exposed as a liar and a cheat. Trapped and desperate, Thornton played his final venomous card. "This is a fabrication!" he screamed, his face purple with rage. "Commissioner, don't listen to them. Her so-called husband is a known murderer. He has white blood on his hands." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Swift Arrow stepped forward, his dignity a shield against the man's hatred. "6 years ago," he said, his voice calm and powerful, "I defended my cousin from an armed trespasser. In the struggle, the man fell on his own knife. It was self-defense, not murder." Thornton laughed, a crazed, triumphant sound. "A likely story. Tell it to the judge." But to everyone's shock, it was Commissioner Richardson who spoke next. He looked at his notes, then at Swift Arrow. "The Maxwell incident," he said thoughtfully. "I reviewed that file before my departure. The case was investigated. Witnesses from a nearby mission confirmed your account of self-defense. The territorial court closed the case years ago. The blood drained from Thornton's face. He stared at Richardson, then at Swift Arrow, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. That's impossible. I told him. He stopped, realizing his catastrophic mistake. You told him what, Mr. Thornton? Richardson asked, his voice like chips of ice. That he was a wanted fugitive for a crime the government had already cleared him of? That you held his life in your hands, based on a lie you invented yourself? The room was silent, the weight of Thornton's decades of manipulation crashing down around him. But Swift Arrow was not finished. He took a step closer to the man who had raised him, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. You didn't just lie about the Maxwell incident, did you, Thornton? He said, his voice low and dangerous. He held up the old, faded deed. You lied about everything. He turned to the council. This man did not find me after my parents were killed by settlers. He is the man who had them killed, so he could steal their land. A collective gasp went through the lodge. Thornton looked like he had been struck by lightning. At that moment, a man stepped forward from the back of the lodge. It was Holloway, the guide who had first brought Sarah to the camp. It's true, Holloway said, his voice thick with a guilt he had clearly carried for years. I was one of his men back then. He told us they were squatters. We were just supposed to scare them off. But it went wrong. Thornton was there. He gave the order. It was over. The final lie had been exposed. Thornton's empire, built on deceit and murder, had crumbled to dust. Richardson's armed men seized him, placing him under arrest not just for fraud, but for conspiracy and murder. As spring finally truly came to the valley, so did a new era for the Blackfeet. With Thornton gone, Richardson, eager to distance the government from the scandal, negotiated a new, much fairer treaty. The tribe kept its most sacred lands and its best hunting grounds. Swift Arrow, now a revered leader, was at the heart of the new agreement. His ability to walk between two worlds no longer a curse, but a profound gift. One warm evening, he led Sarah to a high ridge overlooking the valley. The setting sun bathed the world in a soft, golden light. This will always be our home, he said, his arm wrapped tightly around her. No matter what lines they draw on their maps, this land is in our blood. Our children will know both worlds, she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. They will have the best of both. He turned to her, a question in his eyes. Children? She smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. I think by the time the snow falls again, there will be 3 of us in our cabin. The joy on his face was like the sunrise. He kissed her, a long, tender kiss full of promises and a future they had fought for and won. As they stood there, watching the last light fade, he looked out over the land that was his and hers and theirs. Thornton thought he was punishing us, he said quietly. He thought he was putting us in a cage together. He looked down at her, love shining in his eyes. Instead, he gave us the greatest gift of all. Each other, she whispered. And freedom, he added. The freedom to choose our own path. They walked back to their home hand in hand, no longer prisoners of fate, but masters of their own destiny. The journey had started in darkness and fear, but it had led them here, to a love that had bridged 2 worlds and a future that was brighter than any sunrise. If you enjoyed this story of love, betrayal, and justice, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the map. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel.